us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see.
Headlines across the Western world this week are plastered with photos of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry and the news of their engagement. As the media parades the couple around like they aren't a parasitic monarchy using the product of the British citizens' labour to grow their wealth and spread their empire, real news, which actually affects your life, is slipping under the radar. Arguably, this is not accidental. While the Western world obsesses over the marriage of two royal cousins, yes, they are cousins, descendants of Ralph Bowes, a High Sheriff of County Durham whose family seat was Streatham Castle, Google it, news stories on issues that matter are going largely unreported. Here is a list of 5 very important stories currently being ignored by the mainstream media as an effort to combat this silence. 1. DHS announced plans to release chemicals into the air to simulate a biological terror attack. Earlier this month, TFTP reported that the Department of Homeland Security plans to conduct chemical and biological testing near the border between Kansas and Oklahoma in January and February, and again in June and July, to determine how much protection people would receive from being inside a house or an apartment in the event of a biological terrorist attack, according to a statement on the Homeland Security website. The DHS press release notes. The study is part of the department's ongoing commitment to preparedness and the shared responsibility of protecting the nation's critical infrastructure. The purpose of this study is to gather data that enhances our predictive capabilities in the event of a biological agent attack. Specifically, this work will help in predicting the extent to which an intentional release of a biological agent may penetrate single-family and multi-family structures. These tests will release inert chemicals and biological materials that will be used to measure the amount of material that penetrates the buildings under varied conditions. For their test, the government is going to release titanium dioxide, which it describes as a white odorless powder that is chemically insoluble in water, non-reactive, non-flammable, and non-hazardous. It also plans to release urea powder mixed with a Cl fluorescent brightener. Contrary to the claims of the EPA that these chemicals are safe, lawmakers in Kansas are blowing the whistle as the EU has proposed to classify titanium dioxide as a carcinogen, meaning that it is suspected of causing cancer, specifically when inhaled. To the uninformed zombies, it's just another day in the chemtrail conspiracy theory realm, unfortunately. 2. Shocking CDC tests reveal 3,800 U.S. water supplies up to 400% more contaminated than Flint. Earlier this month, as TFTP reported, Reuters published neighborhood-level blood lead testing results from 34 states, as well as Washington, D.C., which were collected by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. The ominous results of the tests prove that Flint is a cakewalk compared to the rest of the country. The results showed that 3,810 neighborhood areas have levels of lead that are at least double those seen in Flint. Close to half of these sites had levels that were actually 4 times as high as those in Flint. Some of the areas shown to be affected the most were parts of Pennsylvania, New York, Baltimore and parts of Ohio. Researchers noted that areas which were heavily industrialized before lead was recognized as a problem have become hotspots for contamination. A color-coded map identifying many of these hotspots was published with the report, showing some of the highest levels of contamination in Savannah, Georgia, Brooklyn, New York, and even as far north as Rutland, Vermont. 3. Government is now confiscating guns from medical cannabis users. Residents in Honolulu, Hawaii, were recently informed that if they use cannabis for medicinal purposes, they will be given 30 days to voluntarily surrender their firearms and ammunition before the Honolulu Police Department begins confiscation. A series of letters were mailed out from Police Chief Susan Ballard on November 13, as confirmed by a report from Leafly, which noted that the letters appear to represent the first time a law enforcement agency has proactively sought out state-registered medical marijuana patients and ordered them to surrender their guns. The letter from Chief Ballard starts off by claiming that its purpose is to inform the residents of a revised statute. You are disqualified from firearms ownership, possession or controlling firearms. Your medical marijuana use disqualifies you from ownership of firearms and ammunition, Ballard wrote. The letter references HRS 134.7.3, which dictates seizure of firearms upon disqualification. Ballard claimed that residents have until December 13 to voluntarily surrender their firearms, in order to be in compliance with the law. If you currently own or have firearms, you have 30 days upon the receipt of this letter to voluntarily surrender your firearms, permit and ammunition to the Honolulu Police Department or otherwise transfer ownership. 4. U.S. government was caught operating floating black site prisons, torturing people in international waters, outside of U.S. law. A jaw-dropping report from the NY Times exposes these prisons, dubbing them floating Guantanamos. In the name of the war on drugs, hundreds of people are being kidnapped and chained to the decks of U.S. Coast Guard boats where they are tortured for weeks on end. The victims of these floating prisons are often poor fishermen who need money, so they drive a shipment of cocaine from one country to another, many of which are never destined for U.S. land. However, the Coast Guard still goes after them. When these men are captured, they endure slave-like conditions, are forced to wallow in their own feces, endure the elements of the weather 24 hours a day in chains, and are starved to the point of trying to sneak garbage from the ship's crew. These also are the same type of ships that were used to evacuate the homeless during the recent hurricanes in places like Texas. No doubt the many reports of homeless being missing from these areas most likely can be found on board these ships. 5. Thanks to U.S. foreign policy, slavery is once again a thriving industry in Africa. The Obama administration, led by then-Secretary of State, Hillary R. Clinton, orchestrated the overthrow of Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi. Declassified emails revealed that NATO killed Gaddafi to stop the Libyan creation of a gold-backed currency. No matter who would have been in office, this plan would have been carried out as it is the standard operating procedure of U.S. foreign policy. A gold-backed currency is a threat to the establishment elite who knows no party lines. The subsequent void left by the United States intervention in Libya was filled with the region's most violent and depraved crime lords and terrorists. The concentration of such vile individuals has led to Libya becoming a hub for human trafficking, in which human beings are being openly sold in broad daylight for a few $100s. The photos and videos of this new modern-day slave trade are nothing short of horrifying. As the mainstream media continues to distract with fluff, propaganda and divide, it is important to sift through the static. Make no mistake, stories like the royal engagement are deliberately pushed to the forefront to make you think it is important while ignoring real travesties and corruption. We are anonymous. We are legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.